The most dangerous place in this city isn't the dark alleys of the East End. It's the golden halls of the Sterling Academy, where your status is determined before you even speak. And mine was written in the way I dragged my left foot across the marble floor. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. I am so incredibly excited to share this brand new series with you. Before we dive into this intense story of power and secrets, I have some huge news. The join button is finally active. If you'd like to support the channel and help me keep creating these stories, I'd be so grateful if you checked out the membership perks. To those who have already supported, and to all of you watching, liking, and commenting, thank you from the bottom of my heart for being part of this journey. Your support truly means the world to me. Now let's begin. Part 1: The Broken Beauty. The hallways of Sterling Academy didn't just smell like expensive floor wax and old money. They smelled like judgment. To everyone else, the sound of the morning bell was a call to class. To me, it was the start of a gauntlet. Click, drag, click. My cane hit the polished marble with a rhythmic, unforgiving sound. It was the metronome of my life. I was Arlo, the scholarship student, the charity case, the Omega with a defect. In a society that worshipped physical perfection and alpha dominance, my limp was more than an injury. It was a social death sentence. Coming through, clear the way for the clockwork toy. A heavy shoulder slammed into mine, sending me reeling. My books tumbled, sprawling across the floor like fallen white flags. I gripped the railing, my knuckles white, as a group of alphas sauntered past, laughing. At the center was Sloan. He was the golden boy of the academy, heir to a shipping empire, and a sadistic bully who treated the school like his private hunting ground. "Sorry about that, Arlo," Sloan sneered, not looking sorry at all. He stopped and ground his heel into one of my notebooks. "I forgot you don't have the balance to stay upright on your own." The crowd gathered quickly. They always did. There was no entertainment quite like watching an Omega struggle. I knelt down, my movements stiff and painful, trying to gather my things. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Don't cry," I told myself. "If you cry, they win." "What's the matter?" "Need a hand." Sloan reached down, but instead of helping, he snatched my cane away. I froze. Without the cane, my left side felt like it was leaning into an abyss. I had to grab the edge of a locker to keep from collapsing. "Give it back, Sloan," I whispered, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. "Come and get it, little bird," he taunted, holding the carbon fiber stick high above his head. "Or maybe you can crawl for it. That seems more appropriate for someone like you." The laughter intensified. It was a suffocating, jagged sound. I looked around the circle of faces, people I had shared classes with for years, and saw nothing but cold amusement. I was a subhuman to them, a broken thing. And then the air died. It didn't just get quiet, it became heavy. A sudden, sharp chill swept through the corridor, carrying a scent that stopped the breath in my lungs. It was the smell of a brewing storm, ozone, dark cedarwood, and the metallic tang of unsheathed steel. The laughter vanished instantly. The students at the back of the crowd began to scramble away, their faces turning pale. A path opened up, not because people stepped aside, but because they were fleeing from a shadow. At the end of the hall stood a man who looked like he had been carved out of obsidian. He was tall, his frame filling the hallway with a terrifying, predatory grace. He wore a charcoal suit that looked like armor, a silk tie the color of dried blood, and an expression that suggested he was deciding which of us to destroy first. Chase Sterling. He wasn't a student. He was the man who owned the land the academy sat on. He was the head of the Sterling Syndicate, the ghost king of the city's underworld. Rumor said he had personally ended the lives of 3 rivals before his 25th birthday. He was an alpha whose presence was so potent it made the air vibrate. Chase walked forward. He didn't look at the students. He didn't look at Sloan. His icy, sapphire eyes were locked entirely on me, pinned to the locker, trembling and broken. Every step he took sounded like a death knell. Thud, thud, thud. He stopped in front of Sloan. Sloan, who was a head shorter and suddenly looking very much like a frightened child, began to shake. The cane slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor. "Mr. Sterling," Sloan stammered, his voice 3 octaves higher. We were just having some fun. School spirit, you know?" Chase didn't speak. He simply looked down at Sloan's hand, the one that had pushed me. Slowly, Chase reached out and gripped Sloan's wrist. The sound of Sloan's bones creaking under the pressure was audible in the silent hall. "Fun." Chase's voice was a low, melodic growl that vibrated in my very marrow. "You find it entertaining to interfere with the focus of a student under my scholarship program? I didn't know he was yours." Sloane gasped, dropping to his knees as Chase twisted his arm with clinical precision. He isn't mine, Chase corrected, his voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a blade against the throat. He is me. An insult to his dignity is a debt owed to my house. And I always collect my debts. Chase flicked his wrist, tossing Sloane aside like a piece of trash. Sloane scrambled away, not even looking back, followed by the rest of the crowd who fled in a panicked swarm. I was left alone with the monster. My legs gave out. The adrenaline that had been holding me up vanished, and I began to slide down the locker toward the floor. Before I could hit the ground, a strong, warm hand caught my waist. The contact was electric. A jolt of pure alpha energy surged through me, making my scent, usually a faint, shy jasmine, bloom in a desperate, submissive response. I gasped, looking up into those terrifying blue eyes. Up close, Chase was even more beautiful and more lethal. He smelled of power. "Easy, Arlo," he murmured. He reached down and picked up my cane with his free hand, but he didn't give it back to me. Instead, he tucked it under his arm. "You won't be needing this for a while," he said. I can't walk without it," I managed to say, my face flushing with heat. "I know," Chase replied. Without a word of warning, he swept me up into his arms. I let out a small cry of shock, my hands instinctively flying up to clutch at his shoulders. His muscles were like granite beneath the expensive fabric of his suit. He held me as if I weighed nothing, as if I were the most precious thing he had ever touched, yet also his latest conquest. "Where are you taking me?" I asked, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could feel it against his chest. Chase began to walk toward the main exit, ignoring the teachers and administrators who stood frozen in the doorways, too terrified to intervene. He looked down at me, a dark, predatory smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "The academy is no longer a safe place for you, Arlo. The vultures have seen your blood. Now, you belong in the dragon's horde." He stepped out into the bright morning sun, where a fleet of black armored SUVs waited. A dozen men in tactical gear bowed their heads as he approached. "But I have classes, my scholarship," I protested weakly. Chase stopped by the open door of the lead vehicle. He leaned in close, his lips brushing the shell of my ear, sending shivers racing down my spine. "Your scholarship is paid. Your classes are canceled. From this moment on, you are under the protection and the command of the Sterling family. You wanted to be invisible, Arlo? That life is over. I've claimed you, and I never let go of what is mine." He placed me into the soft leather seat of the car. As the door clicked shut, sealing out the world I once knew, I realized with a jolt of terror and strange, dark excitement. The Limp Omega didn't exist anymore. I was the prize of the Mafia king, and the war for my soul had just begun. End of Part 1. Part 2, The Gilded Cage. The hum of the armored SUV was the only sound in a world that had suddenly gone quiet. Outside the tinted windows, the familiar streets of the city blurred into streaks of gray and neon. But inside, the air was thick with the scent of cedarwood and the unspoken weight of a man who moved mountains with a whisper. I sat as far away from Chase as the leather bench would allow, my hands trembling in my lap. My cane, my only lifeline to stability, lay on the floor mat between us, looking like a discarded toy. I felt exposed. Without the physical barrier of my books or the support of my cane, I was just a boy with a broken leg and a racing heart, trapped in a moving fortress with the most dangerous man in the country. Chase didn't look at me. He was scrolling through a tablet, the blue light reflecting off his sharp, aristocratic features. He looked calm, almost bored, while my entire world had just been set on fire. "Where are you taking me?" I finally whispered. My voice sounded small, even to my own ears. Chase didn't look up immediately. He finished a message, set the tablet aside, and then turned those piercing blue eyes toward me. The intensity was enough to make me want to crawl into the upholstery. "To a place where people don't trip you for sport," he said. His voice was smooth, like expensive bourbon, but there was an edge to it that suggested he wasn't being kind, he was being territorial. "You're bleeding, Arlo." I looked down. In the chaos of the hallway, I hadn't realized that when I fell, the edge of a locker must have sliced my palm. A thin trail of crimson was staining my school trousers. "It's nothing," I said quickly, trying to hide my hand. "I'm used to it." "That," Chase said, leaning forward until he was inches from my face, "is the problem. You're used to being a victim. In my house, that is a habit you will break. Or I will break it for you." The Sterling estate wasn't a house, it was a monument to power. Located high in the hills, guarded by iron gates and men with hollow eyes and heavy holsters, it loomed over the city like a silent watchman. As the car stopped, a guard opened the door. I reached for my cane, but Chase was faster. He snatched it up, but instead of handing it to me, he stepped out and waited. "I can walk," I said, a flash of stubbornness lighting up my chest. "If you just give me the cane." "I told you," Chase said, his silhouette framed by the looming mansion behind him. "You won't be needing this." "Not today." Before I could protest, he reached in and pulled me out. This time, he didn't carry me like a princess. He slung one of my arms over his broad shoulders and gripped my waist with a hand that felt like a heated iron. He forced me to lean into him, forced me to feel the terrifying strength of his body as he navigated me up the stone steps. The interior was a cathedral of marble and gold. Every piece of furniture looked like it belonged in a museum, yet the atmosphere was cold, sterile, and dangerous. "Take him to the West Wing," Chase commanded a waiting maid. "Clean the wound, feed him, and find him something to wear that doesn't smell like a state-funded hallway." "Wait," I cried out as the maid approached. "You can't just keep me here. My parents." "Your parents are being taken care of," Chase interrupted, his back already turned as he walked toward a set of massive oak doors. "A generous grant has been deposited into their account. They believe you are on an exclusive, all-expenses-paid academic retreat. They were very happy for you, Arlo." The floor felt like it was shifting beneath me. He had thought of everything. He hadn't just taken me. He had erased my exit strategy. 2 hours later, I was sitting on the edge of a bed that was larger than my entire bedroom at home. I was wearing silk pajamas that felt like water against my skin. My hand was bandaged, and a tray of food that looked too beautiful to eat sat untouched on the nightstand. The room was stunning, but the windows were reinforced, and the door didn't have a lock on the inside. It only had a handle on the outside. I stood up, testing my weight. Without my cane, I had to hop or lean heavily on the furniture. I made it to the window. The view was breathtaking. The entire city laid out like a map. Somewhere down there was my old life. My boring, painful, predictable life. The door clicked open. I spun around, losing my balance. I braced for the fall, but a shadow crossed the room in a flash. Chase caught me by the waist, his grip tightening as he pulled me flush against his chest. "You're remarkably bad at following directions," he murmured. He was no longer wearing his suit jacket. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the faint edge of a black tattoo creeping up his neck. "I don't belong here," I said, my voice shaking as I looked up at him. "Why me? There are thousands of Omegas in this city. Perfect ones. Beautiful ones who can walk without a limp. Why would a man like you want this?" I gestured vaguely at my leg. Chase's expression shifted. The cold mask slipped for a fraction of a second, replaced by something dark and hungry. He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw before stopping at my bottom lip. "Because the perfect ones are boring, Arlo," he whispered, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "They are predictable. But you have a fire in you that you've tried to drown in your own shame. I saw it when you looked at Sloan. You didn't want him to stop. You wanted him to burn." He leaned in closer, his scent, that intoxicating mix of storm and cedar, filling my senses until I couldn't think straight. "I don't want a trophy, Arlo. I want a partner who knows what it's like to be broken, because only the broken know how to truly survive. And I'm going to make sure you're the most powerful survivor this city has ever seen." He let go of me suddenly, and I stumbled back onto the bed. He looked down at me, his eyes cold once again. "Dinner is at 8. Don't make me come and get you again. In this house, we don't limp, Arlo. We soar. Even if I have to be the one to carry you until you learn how." He walked out, the heavy thud of the door echoing like a gavel. I sat there in the silence, the silk of my sleeves feeling like shackles. I was safe from the bullies at school, but I had just realized something far more terrifying. I hadn't been rescued. I had been recruited by the devil himself. And the worst part? A part of me, the dark, angry part he had seen, was starting to like it. End of part 2. Part 3, The Lion's Den. The silk against my skin felt like a bribe. Every thread of this expensive robe was a reminder that I was no longer a person. I was a project. And in Chase Sterling's world, projects either succeeded or they were destroyed. The clock on the mahogany mantel ticked toward 8. I looked at the heavy doors of my room, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had no cane. I had no shoes. Just the cold marble under my bare feet and the lingering scent of cedarwood that seemed to haunt the very air of this mansion. I tried to stand, my left leg buckling slightly. I grabbed the bedpost, my knuckles white. "In this house, we don't limp," he had said. The words felt like a challenge, a cruel joke played by a man who had never known a day of physical weakness in his life. The door pushed open. It wasn't Chase. It was two men in suits, their faces like stone, their hands folded neatly in front of them. "Mr. Sterling is waiting, Arlo," the one on the left said. His voice was devoid of emotion. I can't walk that far without my support," I said, trying to sound firmer than I felt. Without a word, the two men stepped forward. They didn't offer an arm. They simply stood on either side of me, waiting. It was clear. I could walk on my own, or they would drag me. I took a breath, gritted my teeth, and stepped forward. Every step was a white-hot flash of effort, my body screaming for the balance it had relied on for years. I leaned heavily on the walls, my breath coming in shallow gasps. By the time we reached the grand dining hall, a thin sheen of sweat covered my forehead. The doors swung open to reveal a room that felt more like a courtroom than a place to eat. A long, black obsidian table stretched across the center. At the head sat Chase, looking lethal in a black shirt, his sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms covered in intricate, dark ink. But he wasn't alone. 6 other men sat around the table. Older men with scarred faces and eyes that had seen too much blood. The capos of the Sterling Syndicate. The air in the room was suffocating, thick with the scent of various alphas, sharp, aggressive, and territorial. As I entered, stumbling slightly, every head turned. The silence was instantaneous and predatory. "So," a man with a jagged scar across his nose laughed, his voice like grinding gravel. "This is the little bird you went to the academy for, Chase? He looks like he'd snap in a stiff breeze." I froze. The mockery was different here. In school, it was childish. Here, it felt like being sized up by a pack of wolves deciding which part to eat first. Chase didn't look at the man. He kept his eyes on me, his gaze tracing my trembling legs. He didn't offer to help. He didn't tell me to sit. He just watched. "Sit, Arlo," Chase commanded, gesturing to the chair at his immediate right. The seat of honor. The seat of the consort. I moved toward it, my leg dragging slightly across the floor. The sound, scuff, step, scuff, seemed to echo in the cavernous room. I could feel the heat of their judgment. "He's a cripple, Chase," another man muttered, swirling a glass of dark red wine. "The Sterling family is built on strength. What use is an Omega who can't even stand straight?" I reached the chair, my face burning with a mix of shame and a rising, flickering anger. I lowered myself into the seat, gripping the edge of the table so hard my bandaged hand throbbed. "Strength isn't always in the legs, Victor," Chase said, his voice dangerously low. He finally looked up, his blue eyes cold enough to freeze the wine in Victor's glass. "Sometimes, it's in what a person can endure without breaking. Arlo has endured more in a hallway of bullies than you have in your gated estate. He's a liability," Victor spat. "If the rival families find out you've tied yourself to a broken..." Slam. Chase's hand hit the table with a force that made the silver rattle and the alphas jump. The room went deathly silent. Chase leaned toward Victor, his shadow stretching long and terrifying across the table. "He is not a liability," Chase hissed. "He is my choice. And if anyone at this table has a problem with my choices, they are welcome to step outside and discuss it with the asphalt." No one moved. Even the most hardened killers lowered their eyes. Chase turned back to me, his expression softening just a fraction. Not into kindness, but into something more intense. Possession. He reached out, his hand covering mine on the table. His skin was hot, his grip firm. He leaned in, his voice for my ears only. "Now, Arlo. They think you're weak. They think you're a victim. Show them the fire I saw." I looked at the men around the table. I saw their doubt, their disgust, their arrogance. And suddenly, the fear that had been my constant companion for years was replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. If I was going to be a prisoner in this golden cage, I wasn't going to be the bird that sang for its dinner. I was going to be the one with the sharpest beak. I reached for my water glass, my hand steady. I looked Victor straight in the eye, something an Omega should never do to an Alpha, and took a slow, deliberate sip. "You're right, Victor," I said, my voice surprisingly clear. "I can't run. That means I've had to learn how to fight while standing my ground. Can you say the same, or do you only feel strong when you're behind a desk?" A collective gasp went around the table. Victor's face turned a deep, angry purple. Chase, however, let out a short, dark laugh that sounded like a victory. "Enough," Chase said, though he was still looking at me with a dark glimmer of pride. "Dinner is served." The meal was a blur of tension and expensive food I couldn't taste. Throughout it all, Chase's hand never left mine. It was an anchor, a tether, and a claim. When the men finally filed out, leaving us alone in the massive room, the silence changed. It was no longer heavy with threat. It was heavy with something else. Something electric. Chase stood up and walked around the table. He stood behind me, his hands resting on my shoulders. I could feel the heat of him through my silk robe. "You survived the lions," he whispered, his lips grazing the back of my neck. "I'm still a prisoner," I reminded him, though my breath hitched as his hands slid down to my chest. "You're a queen in the making, Arlo," Chase corrected. He leaned down, his voice dropping to a gravelly purr. "But the lions were the easy part. Tonight, we start your real training. You will learn to walk without that cane, not because you have to, but because I want to see you walk toward me." He picked me up, his arms sure and strong, and began to carry me back toward the West Wing. As we moved through the dark, silent halls, I realized I was no longer afraid of the monsters in the shadows. I was being carried by the biggest monster of them all. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I wanted him to let go. End of Part 3. Part 4, The Breaking Point. They say that pain is just a signal, a message from the body to the brain that something is wrong. But as I stood in the center of the massive, cold gym in the basement of the Sterling estate, pain was the only thing telling me I was still alive. Chase didn't want me to heal. He wanted me to rebuild. The morning sun didn't reach this part of the mansion. The gym was a cathedral of steel and glass, smelling of ozone and hard work. I stood shivering in a pair of silk shorts and a thin tank top, my bare feet feeling the bite of the polished floor. Chase was already there. He had traded his suit for a black compression shirt that clung to every muscle of his torso like a second skin. He looked like a statue brought to life, perfect, powerful, and utterly unforgiving. In his hand, he held my cane. "You've used this as a shield for 10 years, Arlo," Chase said, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Every time someone looked at you, you showed them this stick so they would know exactly where to strike. You made it easy for them. It's not a shield, it's a necessity." I snapped, my voice cracking. My hip was shattered. "The doctors said you would walk with a limp," Chase interrupted, stepping closer until his heat began to radiate against my cold skin. "They didn't say you had to carry your trauma like a flag. Today, we burn the flag." Before I could process his words, he snapped the carbon fiber cane over his knee. The sound was like a gunshot. Crack. The pieces clattered to the floor. I felt a surge of pure, blinding panic. My knees buckled, and I reached out for a weight rack to keep from falling. "What are you doing?" I screamed, tears stinging my eyes. I can't move without that." "Watch me," Chase commanded. He walked to the far end of the gym, about 20 feet away. He turned around, crossing his arms over his chest. "Walk to me, Arlo." "I can't." "Walk. To. Me." His voice was a low thunder. "If you don't, you stay in this gym. No food. No bed. Just you and the floor." I looked at him, hatred bubbling up in my chest. He was a monster. A cruel, sadistic tyrant who thought he could buy my soul and then break my body for fun. I gripped the weight rack, my knuckles turning purple. I took a step. My left leg felt like it was being pierced by 1,000 needles. I stumbled, my hip grinding with a dull, sickening ache. I let out a sob, my hands clawing at the air as I fell forward. I hit the mats hard, the air leaving my lungs in a sharp wheeze. "Again," Chase said. He hadn't moved an inch. "I hate you." I hissed into the mat, my face flushed with shame. "Good," Chase replied, his voice devoid of pity. "Hate is a much better motivator than self-pity. Use it. Use that anger to hold your weight." I pushed myself up. My arms were shaking. My leg was a useless weight dragging behind me. But the look in Chase's eyes, that cold, expectant stare, made something inside me snap. I wasn't going to let him watch me crawl. I stood. It was ugly. It was shaky. I leaned my weight onto my right side, my body tilted at an awkward angle. I took a step, then another. The distance felt like a mile. Each movement was a battle against my own biology. I was sweating, my hair sticking to my forehead, my breath coming in ragged hitches. Click, drag, click. The sound was in my head now, even without the cane. I was halfway there when my leg finally gave out completely. I collapsed, but this time, I didn't hit the floor. Chase was there. He had moved with a speed that shouldn't be possible for a man of his size. He caught me, his large hands anchoring under my armpits, hoisting me up until my toes barely touched the floor. "You moved 10 feet, he whispered into my ear. His breath was warm, a sharp contrast to the cold fury I felt. "I failed," I choked out, my head hanging low. "No," Chase said, his grip tightening. He turned me around, so I was forced to look at him. His eyes weren't cold anymore. They were burning with an intensity that made my heart skip a beat. You moved without your shield. You survived the fall. Now we do it again. He didn't let go of me. He stayed close, his body a hair's breadth away from mine. He became my new support. Every time I wavered, his hand was there on my waist, a steadying force. Every time I winced, he shifted his weight to give me a second of rest. It was a strange, intimate torture. We moved back and forth across that gym for hours. By the end, I was leaning entirely against him, my head resting on his shoulder, my legs dragging like lead. Enough for today, Chase finally said. He picked me up, the now familiar sensation of being cradled in his arms, and carried me toward the elevator. I was too exhausted to protest. I closed my eyes, listening to the steady, powerful beat of his heart against my ear. "Why are you doing this, Chase?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper as we ascended to the main floors. "Why do you care if I limp or not?" Chase was silent for a long time. I thought he wouldn't answer. But as the elevator doors opened, he tightened his hold on me. "Because a king needs a consort who can stand beside him when the world tries to bring them to their knees," he said, his voice thick with a dark promise. "And because I want to be the only thing you ever have to lean on." He carried me back to my room, but he didn't leave. He sat me on the edge of the bed and knelt on the floor between my legs. He took my left foot in his hands, his thumbs beginning to massage the cramped muscles with a surprising, gentle skill. The touch was electric. I looked down at the most feared man in the city, the man who broke bones for a living, kneeling at my feet. "Tomorrow will be harder," he warned, looking up at me. "I'll be ready," I said, and for the first time I meant it. I saw a ghost of a smile play on his lips, a predator's smile, satisfied and hungry. He reached up, his hand tangling in my hair, pulling my head down until our foreheads touched. "I know you will, Arlo, because you're mine, and I don't choose losers." As he left the room, locking the door behind him, I looked at the broken pieces of my cane on the floor. I realized then that Chase hadn't just broken my support. He had started to break the person I used to be. And the person emerging from the ruins was someone I didn't recognize, someone stronger, darker, and dangerously obsessed with the man who had ruined me. End of Part 4. Part 5, The Blood Moon Gala. The bruises on my legs from yesterday's training were hidden beneath trousers that cost more than my father made in a year. In the reflection of the floor-to-ceiling mirror, I didn't see the limping scholarship student anymore. I saw a stranger draped in midnight blue silk, a hollow-eyed doll owned by a king who played with lives like chess pieces. The Sterling estate was buzzing with a different kind of energy tonight. It wasn't the quiet, lethal tension of a business meeting. It was the sharp, jagged electricity of a challenge. Tonight was the Blood Moon Gala, an annual gathering of the city's underground elite. It was a neutral ground where peace was brokered, and wars were declared over glasses of vintage champagne. And tonight, Chase was debuting his prize. I stood by the window of my room, my hands trembling as I adjusted the silver cufflink on my wrist. I had no cane. My left leg felt like lead, a dull ache radiating from my hip down to my ankle. Chase had forbidden the staff from giving me even a wooden stick. "If you fall, Arlo, you fall into me," he had told me an hour ago, his voice a dark caress. The door opened, and the air in the room instantly became heavier, charged with that familiar scent of ozone and expensive tobacco. Chase stepped in, wearing a tuxedo that made him look like a god of the underworld. He didn't say a word. He just walked over and stood behind me, looking at our reflection. "You look like you belong at my side," he murmured, his hands sliding around my waist, pulling my back against his solid chest. "Do you feel it? The power of the name you carry now." "I feel like a target, Chase," I whispered, my breath hitching as he leaned down to press a kiss to the sensitive skin just below my ear. "Good," he growled. "A target is only hit if it stands still. Tonight we move. We show them that the Sterling line isn't just strong, it's untouchable." He turned me around, his thumbs tracing the dark circles under my eyes. "Stay close. Don't speak unless I look at you. And Arlo, if anyone touches you, I will burn this city to the ground before the sun rises." The ballroom was a sea of masks, silk, and hidden holsters. The music was a slow, haunting cello melody that felt like a warning. As we entered at the top of the grand staircase, the room went silent. 100 pairs of eyes, alphas, betas, and the occasional high society omega, turned toward us. I felt the familiar surge of panic. My leg wobbled. I instinctively reached for a phantom cane, my hand grasping at empty air. Suddenly, Chase's hand was there. He didn't grab me. He simply offered his forearm, a pillar of granite in a world of shifting sand. I took it, my fingers digging into his sleeve. "Step," he whispered, so low only I could hear. We descended. Left, right drag. Left, right drag. I focused on the rhythm. I focused on the heat of his arm. We reached the floor, and the crowd parted like water before a shark. "Chase, you finally brought the little bird out of the cage." A man stepped forward. He was older, with slicked-back white hair, and a smile that didn't reach his cold, reptilian eyes. This was Silas Vane, the head of the Vane family and Chase's primary rival in the narcotics trade. Behind him stood two alphas who looked like they enjoyed breaking things. "Silas," Chase acknowledged, his voice a flat, dangerous monotone. "I see you've brought your shadows with you. Afraid of the dark." Silas laughed, a dry, rattling sound. His eyes slid to me, scanning me from head to toe with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. "So this is the defect the rumors were about. A limping Omega, Chase? Really? I thought you had better taste in investments." I felt the insult like a slap. My grip on Chase's arm tightened. I waited for Chase to snap, to growl, to end the man right there. But Chase just smiled, a thin, predatory curve of the lips that was far scarier than a snarl. "Arlo isn't an investment, Silas. He's a revelation. He's seen more pain in a week than your sons have seen in their entire lives. Tell me, does it bother you? That a boy who struggles to walk still has more backbone than your entire organization." Silas's smile vanished. His alphas took a step forward, their scents turning sour and aggressive. The room held its breath. "Careful, Sterling," Silas hissed. "The world is changing. A king with a broken consort is a king with a target on his back. Maybe the Vane family should help you lighten the load." Before anyone could react, Silas reached out, his hand moving toward my face. Not to strike, but to humiliate, to pet me like an animal. I didn't think. I didn't wait for Chase. The weeks of being mocked, the hours of falling in the gym, the fire Chase had been stoking in my soul, it all surged forward. I didn't move away. I leaned forward, catching Silas's wrist with my free hand. I squeezed, my nails digging into his expensive skin. I looked him dead in the eye, my voice a cold, sharp blade. "If you touch me," I whispered, loud enough for the surrounding circle to hear, "I won't be the one who breaks. But I promise you, by the time Chase is done with you, you'll wish you had my limp just so you could crawl away faster." The silence that followed was deafening. Silas looked shocked. Chase looked mesmerized. Silas wrenched his hand away, his face turning a mottled red. "You little." "I think that's enough social theater for one night," Chase interrupted, his hand moving to the small of my back, claiming me completely. He leaned into Silas's space, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Arlo just gave you a warning. I suggest you take it, because the next time he speaks to you, it will be to give the order for your execution." Chase steered me away, walking through the crowd with a pace that forced me to keep up, to push through the pain in my hip. We reached a secluded balcony overlooking the dark gardens. The cold night air hit my face, and the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a violent trembling. My leg gave out, and I slumped against the stone railing. I shouldn't have said that," I gasped, my chest heaving. "He's going to kill me. They're all going to kill me." Chase stepped into my space, pinning me against the railing with his body. He didn't look angry. He looked intoxicated. He grabbed my face in both hands, his thumbs forcing my eyes to meet his. "That," he breathed, his eyes glowing with a dark, primal pride, "was the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. You didn't just stand, Arlo. You bit back." "I was terrified," I admitted, a tear escaping and rolling down my cheek. "Terrified people are the most dangerous," Chase said. He leaned down, his lips inches from mine. "You're learning. You're becoming exactly what I need. My shadow. My weapon." He kissed me then. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a claim, a collision of teeth and tongue that tasted like expensive wine and desperate survival. It was the kiss of a man who had finally found the piece of his soul he didn't know was missing. As he pulled away, leaving me breathless and dizzy, the sound of a distant explosion rocked the estate. Screams erupted from the ballroom. Chase didn't flinch. He just looked toward the doors, a dark smirk playing on his lips. It seems Silas didn't take the warning. "Stay behind me, Arlo. It's time to show them what happens when you try to steal from a king." He reached into his waistband, pulling out a sleek, black handgun and checking the chamber with a practiced click. "The gala is over," he said, turning back to me. "The war is here. Can you walk, or do I carry you into battle?" I looked at the chaos, then at the man who had ruined my life only to give me a reason to fight for it. I stood up, my legs screaming, my heart roaring. I didn't reach for him. "I'll walk," I said. End of Part 5. Part 6. The Shattered Glass. The sound of the first explosion wasn't just the destruction of a grand entrance. It was the sound of my old life finally collapsing into dust. In the flickering red light of the emergency sirens, I realized that safety was a lie. There was only the hunter and the prey, and tonight, the prey was wearing diamonds. The ballroom was no longer a place of elegance. It was a chaotic theater of smoke, shattered crystal, and the high-pitched ringing of ears that had been too close to the blast. Guests in millions of dollars worth of attire were screaming, scrambling over each other like panicked livestock. Chase didn't panic. He moved like a shadow through the haze, his hand a constant, grounding pressure on my lower back. He didn't look back at the destruction. His eyes were scanning the balconies, the exits, and the faces of the men drawing weapons from beneath their tailored coats. "Stay low, Arlo," he commanded, his voice slicing through the noise with chilling clarity. "Chase, your shoulder," I gasped. A piece of flying glass had sliced through his tuxedo jacket, and a dark stain was already blooming across the fabric. "It's a scratch," he dismissed, his eyes locking onto a group of men in tactical gear bursting through the side terrace. "Vane's men. They aren't here to kill me. They're here to take you. To use you as leverage." The thought sent a cold shiver down my spine, but for the first time, it wasn't the shaking of a victim. It was the vibration of a bowstring pulled tight. I gripped the edge of a fallen marble table, my left leg throbbing with a dull, rhythmic pain that I forced into the back of my mind. "They won't take me," I said, my voice surprised by its own steel. Chase glanced at me, a flash of dark approval crossing his face. "Hold this." He pressed a heavy, cold object into my hand. A spare magazine. "When I tell you to move, you move. Don't look back. Don't stop for anyone. If someone gets in your way who isn't wearing a sterling crest, you do what you have to do." The firefight broke out in a deafening roar of muzzle flashes. The alphas of the Sterling family moved with practiced, lethal synchronization, but Vane had brought an army. We were being pushed back toward the private corridors of the West Wing. Pop, pop, pop. The sound of gunfire was rhythmic, almost like the ticking of a clock. I followed Chase, my body leaning into his as we navigated the debris. My limp was there, heavy and stubborn, but I had learned how to throw my weight, how to use the momentum of my fall to propel myself forward. I wasn't walking. I was a wounded predator stalking through the ruins. We reached the heavy oak doors of the library when the world tilted. A flashbang grenade detonated just feet away. The white light was blinding, the sound of physical punch to the chest. I hit the floor, my ears ringing so loudly I couldn't hear my own scream. Through the blur, I saw Chase. He was down on one knee, shaking his head, his gun raised but his aim shaky. From the shadows of the hallway, a massive alpha emerged, one of Vane's lead enforcers. He held a combat knife, the blade black and serrated. He wasn't going for Chase. He was looking at me. "The broken bird," the man sneered, his voice a muffled vibration in my ringing ears. "Vane wants to see how much you scream when we snap the other leg." He lunged. I was on the floor, my back against a bookshelf. My cane was gone. My protector was dazed. I had nothing but the heavy silver trophy I had knocked off a pedestal during the fall. As the man reached for me, his hand closing around my throat, I didn't beg. I didn't close my eyes. I swung the heavy silver base with every ounce of frustration, pain, and hatred I had stored up for 10 years. Crack. The metal met his temple. The man's eyes rolled back, and he slumped over me, his weight pinning my bad leg to the floor. I let out a choked cry of pain, but I didn't stop. I pushed his dead weight off me, my fingers clawing at the carpet. "Arlo." Chase was there. He had recovered, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror and something that looked like worship. He kicked the man's body aside and pulled me into his arms, checking me for wounds. "Are you hit? Did he touch you?" His voice was frantic, a side of the Mafia boss I had never seen. "I'm fine," I wheezed, clutching his shirt. "Chase, we have to go. More are coming." He picked me up, but instead of the usual graceful carry, he held me tight against his chest, his head buried in my neck for a split second. "You saved yourself," he whispered, a ragged edge to his voice. "My brave, broken boy." We made it to the hidden safe room behind the library's false wall. The heavy steel door hissed shut, sealing out the sounds of the massacre. The room was small, lit by dim red emergency lights, stocked with monitors showing every angle of the estate. Chase slumped against the wall, his breath coming in heavy rasps. The wound on his shoulder was deeper than he had admitted. Blood was soaking through his shirt, dripping onto the floor. "Sit," I commanded. He looked up, startled by the tone in my voice. For the first time, he obeyed. I knelt between his legs, the same position he had taken with me in the gym, and tore a strip of silk from my own shirt. My hands were steady as I began to bind his shoulder. "You're remarkably good at this," he murmured, his eyes tracking my every move. "I've spent my life tending to my own injuries, Chase," I said, tightening the knot. "I know how to stop the bleeding." He reached out with his good arm, his hand cupping the back of my neck, pulling me closer until our noses touched. The air in the safe room was hot, smelling of gunpowder and the sudden, intense bloom of our mingling scents. "The world thinks I'm the one protecting you," Chase said, his thumb brushing over the bruise on my cheek where I'd hit the floor. "But tonight, you were the one who held the line. You aren't just a consort, Arlo. You're my equal." "I don't want to be a killer, Chase," I whispered, my heart hammering. "You aren't a killer," he said, his voice dropping to a low, possessive growl. "You're a survivor, and survivors do whatever it takes to keep what belongs to them." He leaned in, his lips brushing mine in a slow, agonizingly tender kiss that spoke of things far deeper than power or property. It was a promise of a future forged in fire. As the monitors showed the sterling reinforcements finally arriving, clearing the halls of the invaders, I realized the truth. I wasn't the boy who dragged his foot anymore. I was the boy who stood his ground when the world exploded. I looked at Chase, my captor, my teacher, my monster. "What happens now?" I asked. Chase stood up, pulling me with him, his hand firm on my waist. He looked at the screen, where Silas Vane was being dragged away in chains. "Now," Chase said, his eyes glowing with a cold, vengeful light, "we stop playing defense. Tomorrow, we take everything they have. And you, Arlo, you'll be right there at my side, leading the way." I didn't reach for a cane. I didn't look for a chair. I leaned into him, my weight supported by his strength, my heart beating in sync with the most dangerous man in the world. The limp was still there. But for the first time, I didn't feel broken. I felt ready. End of Part 6. Part 7, The Iron Throne of Sterling. The morning after the siege didn't bring peace. It brought a cold, clinical silence that was far more terrifying than the gunfire. The grand ballroom was a graveyard of broken glass and expensive dreams, but as I walked through the debris, without a cane, my hand resting firmly on the railing, I realized that the boy who used to flinch at shadows had died in the smoke. The city was waking up to news of a gas leak at the Sterling estate, a convenient lie bought with the kind of money only Chase could move. But inside the walls, the reality was carved in blood. The scent of ozone had been replaced by the sharp, sterile smell of industrial cleaners and the metallic tang of fresh paint. I stood in the center of Chase's private study, a room I had once been forbidden to enter. It was a sanctuary of dark oak, leather-bound secrets, and a desk that dictated the fate of thousands. I wasn't hiding in the West Wing anymore. I was wearing a suit of charcoal wool, tailored to hide the slight tilt of my frame, and my hair was pushed back, revealing the fading bruise on my temple like a badge of honor. The door opened, and the air shifted. Chase walked in, his arm in a black silk sling, his face pale but his eyes burning with a restless, predatory energy. He stopped when he saw me standing behind his desk, my fingers tracing the edge of a map spread across the surface. "You're early, Arlo," he said, his voice a low vibration that made the fine hairs on my arms stand up. "I couldn't sleep," I admitted, looking up. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the glass breaking. I realized, I don't want to wait for them to come back, Chase. I want to be the one who goes to them. Chase walked toward me, his footsteps silent on the thick Persian rug. He didn't stop until he was inches away, his heat radiating through my jacket. He reached out with his good hand, his fingers grazing the cuff of my sleeve. "The Lions are restless today," he murmured. "Vane is in custody, but his associates are scattered. They think the Sterling line is weakened because I was hit. They think my focus is divided because of you." "Is it?" I asked, challenging him with a gaze that didn't waver. Chase's grip tightened on my arm, pulling me flush against him. "My focus has never been sharper. They think you're my weakness, Arlo. They think you're the crack in the armor. They have no idea you're the one holding the blade." The meeting was set for noon in the heart of the financial district, a glass skyscraper that Chase owned through a dozen shell companies. This was the public face of the underworld, where the capos met to decide the transition of power. As we exited the armored SUV, a swarm of reporters and security detail surrounded us. The flashes of cameras were like silent explosions. In the past, I would have lowered my head, hiding behind my bangs and my cane. Not today. I walked beside Chase, my left leg stiff, each step a calculated effort of will. I didn't drag, I marched. I kept my chin parallel to the ground, my expression as unreadable as the tinted windows of the car. I felt the weight of 100 stares, the whispers of "Is that him?" and the broken Omega. I let them whisper. Their words were just wind against stone. We entered the boardroom. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and old-world alphas. 12 men sat around a table of polished obsidian. At the far end sat Marcus Vane, Silas's younger, more volatile brother. He looked like a man who had spent the night planning a funeral, or a coup. "Chase," Marcus said, his voice dripping with false concern. "We heard about the accident. A shame. And you brought your companion. Is this a business meeting or a daycare?" The room erupted in low, jagged laughter. I felt Chase's muscles coil beside me, his scent turning sharp and lethal. He was ready to kill, but I felt a different impulse. I felt the need to dominate. Before Chase could speak, I pulled out the chair at his right hand and sat down. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, and looked directly at Marcus. "It's a business meeting, Marcus," I said, my voice echoing in the sudden silence. "And the business today is your surrender." Marcus blinked, his smirk faltering. "Excuse me. You think because Silas is gone, you can slide into his seat?" I continued, my voice cold and precise. "But we spent the morning looking at your family's offshore accounts. We know about the shipments you lost in the East End. We know you're broke, Marcus. You didn't attack the Sterling estate because you were strong. You attacked because you were desperate." I reached into my breast pocket and pulled out a single thin tablet, sliding it across the obsidian surface. On the screen was a list of names, Marcus's own enforcers who had already accepted donations from the Sterling family to switch sides. "Your house isn't just divided," I whispered. "It's already been bought. You're sitting in a chair that doesn't belong to you, talking to a man who owns your debt." The room went deathly quiet. The other capos looked at the tablet, then at Marcus, then at me. They weren't looking at a broken toy anymore. They were looking at the person who had just dismantled a legacy with a few lines of data. Chase sat back, a dark, triumphant smile playing on his lips. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. He had given me the tools, and I had built the gallows. "This is an insult," Marcus roared, standing up so fast his chair hit the floor. "I won't be lectured by a scholarship brat with a limp." "Sit down, Marcus," Chase finally spoke, his voice like the click of a hammer on a gun. "Or don't. It won't change the fact that Arlo just ended your career in 30 seconds. Now, the rest of you, do we have an understanding? Or does Arlo need to find your bank accounts, too?" One by one, the most feared men in the city lowered their heads. It was a silent surrender, a bloodless coup. As we left the building, the sun was high and unforgiving. We reached the car, and the door closed, sealing us in the quiet luxury of the leather interior. The adrenaline that had sustained me began to ebb, leaving my leg trembling violently. "Arlo," Chase said, his voice unusually soft. He reached over and pulled me onto his lap, his good arm wrapping around my waist, holding me close. I buried my face in his neck, the scent of him finally grounding me. "I did it," I whispered, my voice shaking. "You destroyed them," Chase corrected, his lips pressing against my temple. "You took their pride and turned it into a leash. I've never seen anything more magnificent. I was so scared the whole time," I admitted. Chase tilted my chin up, his blue eyes searching mine. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, Arlo. It's making fear your servant. You aren't the boy from the academy anymore. You're the heart of this family." My heart. He kissed me then, a slow, deep, and possessive kiss that felt like a coronation. I wasn't his property. I wasn't his project. I was his partner in a world that was now ours for the taking. As the car pulled away, I looked out the window at the city skyline. It looked different now. It didn't look like a maze I had to navigate. It looked like a kingdom I had to rule. The limp was still there, a constant reminder of where I had come from. But as I leaned into Chase, feeling the power radiating from him and the new strength rising in myself, I realized I didn't need to walk perfectly to reach the top. I just needed to be the one who survived. End of Part 7. Part 8. The Silent Shackles. The city used to look like a labyrinth of traps to me, a place where every staircase was a mountain and every shadow held a predator. But standing on the rooftop of the Sterling Tower, I realized that the view is very different when you're the one holding the keys to the kingdom. My limp didn't vanish, but in the silence of this height, I finally understood. I wasn't the one broken. The world was. The wind at the top of the skyscraper was a cold, biting reminder of how high we had climbed. Below us, the city lights flickered like a million fallen stars. unaware that their fate was decided in rooms like this one. I stood at the very edge of the glass railing, my hands resting on the cold steel. I didn't need a cane. I didn't even need to lean. I simply stood, my weight distributed with a hard-won balance that felt more like a weapon than a posture. The war with the Vane family was a ghost of the past. The blood had been scrubbed from the marble, and the headlines had moved on to newer scandals. But the change inside me was permanent. The heavy glass doors behind me slid open with a hiss. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. The air itself seemed to bow in his presence, the scent of dark cedarwood and cold rain preceding him like an omen. Chase Sterling. He walked toward me, his pace slow and deliberate. He had discarded his suit jacket, his white shirt unbuttoned at the throat, his sleeves rolled up to reveal the ink that marked his history. He stood behind me, his solid chest pressing against my back, his arms winding around my waist to pull me into his heat. "You're thinking again, Arlo," he murmured, his voice a low vibration that resonated in my very bones. I can feel the gears turning. "What's bothering you?" "I was thinking about the first day," I said, leaning my head back against his shoulder. "About the sound of my cane on the marble. I used to think that sound was my heartbeat, rhythmic, persistent, and lonely. Now, I can't even remember what that boy looked like." Chase turned me around in his arms, his grip firm and possessive. He looked down at me with those icy blue eyes, but they weren't cold anymore. They were filled with a dark, terrifying devotion. "That boy is gone, Arlo. You killed him the moment you stood up to Silas. You buried him the moment you saved my life in that hallway. Don't mourn him. He was a survivor, but you are a conqueror." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't say anything, he just opened it. Inside sat a heavy platinum band, encrusted with black diamonds that seemed to swallow the light. It wasn't a piece of jewelry. It was a seal. "The board is asking questions," Chase said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "They want to know if the Sterling line is going to continue. They want to know if the Limp Omega is a permanent fixture or a passing whim." I looked at the ring, then back at him. "And what did you tell them?" "I told them that I don't make whims," Chase growled, his hand sliding up to cup the back of my neck. "I told them that the Sterling family is no longer just me. It's us. You are the shadow to my flame, Arlo. The silence to my roar. Without you, I'm just a man with a gun. With you, I'm a god." He took my hand, his fingers tracing the scars on my palm from that first day at the academy. He slid the ring onto my finger. It felt heavy, a beautiful, silent shackle. "Tonight, we make it official," Chase said. "The world is waiting downstairs. Every family, every rival, every ally. They're all there to see the boy who tamed the Ghost King." The descent in the private elevator was silent. I watched the floor numbers tick down, my heart hammering a rhythm of pure, unadulterated power. When the doors opened, the grand ballroom of the Sterling Hotel was a sea of black ties and silk gowns. The silence that fell was absolute. It was the same silence as that first day in the academy hallway, but the energy was different. It wasn't mockery anymore. It was fear. It was respect. We walked into the center of the room. I didn't look at the ground. I didn't look for a place to sit. I walked at Chase's side, my hand resting on his arm, my limp a deliberate, rhythmic announcement of my presence. Each scuff step was a reminder that I had survived everything they had thrown at me. We reached the small dais at the end of the room. Chase turned to the crowd, his hand never leaving the small of my back. "Many of you have spent the last few months wondering about the stability of this house," Chase projected, his voice filling every corner of the room. "You've watched the wars, you've heard the rumors. You've seen the weakness in my ranks." He looked down at me, a smirk playing on his lips. "Let me be clear. Arlo is not my weakness. He is the reason I am still standing. He is the architect of the Vane family's downfall. He is the future of the Sterling Syndicate. From this night forward, an insult to him is a death warrant from me, and a command from him is a command from the throne." The room erupted into applause, but I could see the eyes of the alphas. They were recalculating. They were realizing that the Limp Omega was the most dangerous person in the room because he was the only one who had nothing left to fear. The rest of the night was a blur of handshakes and hollow congratulations. I stood my ground, speaking with the authority Chase had cultivated in me, until the early hours of the morning when the last guest had finally slunk away. We were alone in the ballroom, the remnants of the celebration scattered like debris. I looked at the long, empty floor. "Dance with me," I said suddenly. Chase paused, a look of genuine surprise crossing his face. "Arlo, your leg. You've been standing for 6 hours." "I don't care," I said, reaching out for his hand. I want to dance. I want to move through this room without feeling like I'm fighting a war. Just once. Chase didn't argue. He pulled me into his arms, his hand going to my waist, mine going to his shoulder. There was no music, only the distant sound of the city and the rhythm of our breathing. We moved. It wasn't a perfect waltz. My movements were stiff, my balance shifting with every turn. But Chase didn't let me stumble. He moved with me, adjusting his stride to match mine, holding me so close that I didn't need my own strength to stay upright. In that empty ballroom, under the dim light of 100 crystal chandeliers, I finally felt it. The shackles weren't holding me back. They were holding me together. "You're crying," Chase whispered, his thumb catching a stray tear on my cheek. "I'm happy," I said, and for the first time in my life, it wasn't a lie. "I'm happy that it's over. I'm happy that I'm yours." Chase stopped, his forehead resting against mine. "It's never over, Arlo. The world will always try to take what we have. They'll always see a limp and think weakness. They'll always see an omega and think prize. Let them," I said, a dark, predatory smile finally touching my lips. "Let them come. We'll show them exactly what happens when you try to break a diamond." He kissed me then, a final, sealing vow of blood and silk. The boy with the cane was dead. The scholar was a ghost. In his place stood the consort of the Sterling Empire, a man who had turned his pain into a crown. As we walked out of the ballroom, hand in hand, the sun began to rise over the city. The light hit the black diamonds on my finger, casting long, sharp shadows on the marble floor. The limp was still there, but the shackles were silent, and the world was finally ours. The end of Part 8. And that brings us to the end of this journey. Watching Arlo find his strength beside Chase has been an emotional ride, hasn't it? Sometimes, the person who breaks your world is the only one who can help you rebuild it. If you enjoyed being part of this story today, please hit that like button and subscribe to join our growing family. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What was your favorite moment between them? I read every single one of your messages. A huge, heartfelt thank you to my channel members who clicked the join button. Your support means everything to me and helps me keep these stories alive. I truly appreciate you standing by me. Take care of yourselves until we meet again in our next story. I'll be right here waiting for you. This was your BL boyfriend. See you soon, love.